On behalf of, thank you. On behalf of Taylor Clarke, Clive and I are very happy that you've joined us for our session. Let's talk about leadership development. As a reminder, we'll start the session with a conversation between me and Clive. Then we'll open it up with an opportunity for you to give us your thoughts on what we've discussed, and of course, to share your own experience of what makes a great leadership development program. We're not going to do individual introductions, as I say, but it would be a great help if you haven't done already, if you can put your name and who you're with in the chat. Over many years, Clive and I have shared stories about what works and what doesn't, all the time, I guess, trying to surface our tacit knowledge and work out how we can compare it to real evidence. So we're going to talk about it now and invite you to, I guess, eavesdrop on our conversation. Now, this is going to take us about 20 minutes. And as I say, at the end, we're going to open it up to comments, questions, stories, ideas, and so on. But as Clive and I talk, please feel free to post your thoughts into the chat. And as I say, just a reminder, we're recording now, but we'll stop at the end of our conversation. So Clive, anything you want to say before we get actually kicked off?
Yeah, David, great to be here. Great to see so many people on the call. I know it's, this is an issue that's sort of interested me for a long time, so it'd be great to extend the conversation to a few other people who are also interested in it. I'm really looking forward to hearing what everyone's got to say. I think what we're going to do is to talk about probably about four factors, four clusters of ideas that seem to underpin really good, effective leadership development programs, or maybe being a bit more precise. Think about the factors that seem to increase the likelihood that a program will be successful.
Yes.
Okay, so what is it that we've learned? What is it that we know about success in this area and having real impact? I don't think we're going to claim that you have to have all four of these things present, or all of the things we're talking about present, in order to start a leadership development program. That would be ridiculous. Obviously, you would probably never do anything if that was the case. So we're not intending this to be about a council of perfection, but what we want to do is to think about how can you increase the chances of success in your leadership development programs, in the leadership development programs that we work on. And let's get going with that. It's quite a practical, complex thing. So really, we hope this conversation, the opening conversation, will stimulate your thinking and add to ours. So it's about extending our conversation, I think.
Exactly. And I'm glad you got this disclaimer out of the way, Clive. We're not, no guarantees. Nothing's guaranteed to work, but if you do some of the things we're going to talk about, we think success might be more forthcoming. But Clive, before we get into the meat of our conversation, let's just clarify something. When we say leadership development, are we talking about individuals or lots of people? Is it leader development or leadership development?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I must admit, I really like that distinction. I find it helpful myself to make that distinction between leader development and leadership development. It may be, quite a well-known distinction for a lot of people on the call, but for me, I mean, leader development comes out of a kind of talent model of developing individual leaders. Maybe at the extreme end, it's kind of a voluntary process where people, say, I'm interested, I want to be a leader, and can I, join a program? That's to do with interest, ambition, how you see yourself, confidence, all of those things. So on the one hand, leader development, a talent model. The other version, leadership development, as you say, David, is more comes out of an OD model. I think it's about whole system development, developing the capacity or capability of a whole team, organization, or even a wider system, and maybe trying to create a consistent ethos in that organization. We'll just use organization maybe as a shorthand at the moment. About leaders working together to do something collaboratively, or to as a system, if you like. And I think that there does seem to be a kind of narrative now that really the best and the most effective interventions are interventions which are about leadership, capability, capacity as a whole. It'll pop up in various ways.
Absolutely. Okay, so I know that you particularly believe strongly that leadership development needs to be what you call aligned. But what exactly what do you mean by that?
Well, I think there's three types of alignment. The first one is what people refer to as strategic alignment. I think the alignment of the leadership development program behind, let's say, the strategy or the real business challenges of an organization. So how do you ensure that what you're doing in leadership development is kind of there's a line of sight from the program to the strategy. I suppose leadership development and the change management projects that you're running. See, that idea of having leadership development is one of the key levers that you're using to get change or to achieve the strategic goals of your organization. So it's about strategy execution in your context. And I think one of the things, maybe, I don't know, David, whether you've noticed this, but one of those thinking heart moments is when you kind of working with a group, and early on in a program, you kind of say, well, why are we all here? We're here because this leadership development stuff is, aligned behind the strategy of the organization. You put up the strategy or some key things from the strategy, and people go,
where's that from?
What?
Exactly.
Oh, that's when I sort of remember that from about 3 years ago.
Exactly.
When and that weak connection to the strategy is you're kind of fighting against the tide then. So I think that's the first thing. And certainly, my best example of kind of the best program that I was ever involved in was where the link between the strategy, the organization's strategy, and the content of the program was, obvious to everybody. It couldn't be missed. I think the second type of alignment is about alignment between the chief exec's agenda, the personal agenda. And I'm not assuming here that the chief executive's personal agenda and the strategy of the organization are exactly the same thing.
Not always the same.
Often there are all kinds of gaps in language, if not in substance, between the chief exec's real agenda and what he or she is really interested in achieving and pursuing, and the formal strategy of the organization. And alongside that, there's also this other thing about aligning to the preferences, the aspirations of the rest of the senior management of the organization. And sometimes we talk about the importance of sponsorship by the top team of leadership development. And again, very tricky situations and sort of slightly disheartening situations where you find that the chief executive is really kind of committed behind something, but the rest of the top team somehow isn't on the same page. In fact, they're not even on one page together. They're on many different pages with different languages, and they don't have a shared understanding of what's going on. So that sponsorship and alignment at that level is important.
And you mentioned the third element, Clive, as well, yeah?
Yeah, I think that there's also something about expectations, about what can be achieved and the amount of time it might take to achieve that. Does the top team really understand what the behaviors are they're trying to encourage and what the implications of those things happening might be for them? If the change happens and people start behaving in the new ways, am I ready for that? But also how long it might take. Time scales are important here. Leadership development and investment takes.
It's a bit like that be careful what you wish for moment, actually, isn't it? You're wanting these people to change. Are you ready for that change behavior in a way? And Clive, thinking about who should take part in the type of programs that we've got in mind, how do we make sure that we're choosing the right people and that they are in fact ready for development?
I mean, I think this right people, right time is probably the second kind of big criteria. And I mean, for me, again, and I think the evidence supports this. The first set of issues are around finding what I would call strategically placed groups of people. And one way I like to think about that is, where are your strategic implementers? Where are the people who sit between the strategy and the operations that really link those things? Are there groups of people around who kind of they tend to be very influential because they're looking up and making sense of what's above them, but they're also looking down and out and trying to kind of translate that into action. So I think targeting and pre-selection does seem to be really important in terms of real effectiveness. Now I know people can get a bit queasy about that because leaders at all levels, we want open access.
But what you're saying is we
choices.
shouldn't be ashamed or afraid of what I might call differential investment.
Indeed, and I think that it's how do you strike the right balance there? I think about finding plausible reasons for targeting the investment. So there's strategically placed groups. I think there's something about readiness, and are you training groups of people? Or are you developing groups? Using the training word here, are you intervening with groups who are sitting in environments that are ready for these kind of interventions? And how can you make their context more ready, so that if they try and change things back at base, they're going into a willing or a fertile environment. So what do we need to do to create contexts which are ready, as well as participants who are ready for that? So things like knowing why I'm here. Why am I part of this? Why I'm a part of this process is really important. So supportive participants, supportive environments, and making things as accessible as possible is really important. Finally, on that, I think there's something about career timing. If you can also make it career relevant to people, there is definitely then an increase. Lots of research says that you get increased transfer of learning if people see this as relevant to their careers. So
as part of their pathway almost.
How are you going to link it to transitions?
Absolutely, and to what they want to do. Clive, let's move to the actual design. What are the features of a really engaging and impactful leadership development program?
I think that maybe the first thing is you get lots of attention in the design of programs paid to the models and frameworks and the theories and so on. But it's really interesting that there's been a lot of work done on this, and the evidence is that it really doesn't matter which theory or framework you use. There are some that work better than others in certain contexts, and there is something about making some kind of alignment to the objectives of your program and the strategy that you're pursuing. But on the whole, it doesn't really make much difference. What is important, I think, is something about coherence and shared language. That it's the model, the theory, whatever that you're using to underpin it, has got to have some kind of coherence to it. You can't just hop about from one thing to another. And the lack of coherence, I think, is what confuses people. And you end up with a kind of no shared language in the organization. And I think shared language at the end of these processes is really helpful in creating impact. So a coherent narrative, a shared language, really important. And holding on to that over time, some kind of consistency over time is really important. And I think consistency over time, like 5 years of intervening with successive cohorts of people gives you a chance of developing that leadership ethos.
You mean just repetition throughout the program as well?
Almost to the point of bored. You've really bored people. That the incredible levels of boredom are an indicator of success in these things. When they, oh, you're using that language again, the chief executive, you don't want, it's got to be consistent.
And
So
you start to hear the language played back to the organization as well.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think there's that is crucial. I think also at the top of my list, very much is something about real work application. Programs that are problem centered and content light. There's a saying, isn't there, that leadership is difficult to teach, but it can be learned, and that sort of steers you away from content and towards experience, reflection, peer learning, social learning, feedback, coaching, mentoring. That whole thing, spaced.
So you're not a big fan of case studies
processes.
then, Clive, for example, yeah?
No, not unless they are really, close by. The case studies that I can see here in my organization, in my environment.
You see the relevance.
It's got to be, you are your own case study, using your own experience, using the experience of others in the group. And I think, so that reflective practice, reflecting on experience, that idea of, we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience.
Absolutely.
It's another of the mantras there. I think the other final thing on design, something about fear of missing out. How do you create a fear of missing out in the potential participants?
Mm-hmm.
What is it? I've got to go. I've got to turn up, because if I don't, I'm going to miss something. What am I going to miss?
That's that kind of secret sauce, the X factor that pulls people towards a program. Yeah.
I'll not be visible to the top management. I'll miss out on what my colleagues are saying. I'll miss out on the lessons learned. I'll miss out on something socially impressive, some amazing faculty from somewhere. But just what is it that creates FOMO for the process?
So something around advertising programs and the way they're publicizing the organization as well, maybe to get that excitement.
Well, I always think it's something about being in the loop. I'm part of this process. I'm in the loop.
I'm in the gang.
Yeah, well,
That's a different thing. Yeah, exactly. Clive, let's move on. We've all seen great workshops with no follow-up. So what happens when we don't embed the learning that we're trying to impart?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of obvious, but a lot of programs that I've been involved with, kind of aren't thinking, I think, about what really happens afterwards. What's the follow? How can I put it? Integration, embedding, and follow. Because there's stuff to do beforehand, I think. So there's the integration and embedding beforehand. Are the behaviors, the lessons, the changes that you want to see coming out of leadership already embedded in, I don't know, your HR systems? I mean, obviously, performance management systems, measures of success, and so on. So, or are those systems, the incentives, the recognition processes, the promotion process, and so on, the career progress side of things, are they pulling in a different direction from the leadership development program? So how do you get those sorted out as you go into the process? Now that involves perhaps quite a lot of conversations with, I don't know, your HR colleagues, IT, finance, project management, procurement people. How do you make sure that those systems are kind of lined up to support what you're trying to achieve?
So the development program doesn't just sit alongside the organization, it's part of it, and vice versa.
Exactly. So you can be aligned to the strategy and aligned to the chief exec's real agenda, let's say. But if it's not also kind of, the context of the systems and processes of the organization aren't supportive, then you're giving a mixed message. Clearly, you're going to undermine your own investment. So there's that. I think post-event, I mean, there's some lovely evidence that even just a small follow-up phone call a couple of weeks or a couple of months after a program increases the retention and the transfer of learning by huge factors. So even just that idea, giving people the idea that their eyes are still on you afterwards, even if it's a very, very minimal thing, can be really important. But I mean, what are we talking about? We're talking about, well, communities of practice, social support, booster sessions, the kind of follow-ups that you get in one-to-ones with line managers, team conversations. There's a whole raft of stuff that can improve transfer of the learning, the new behaviors, the new ethos.
I was going to ask you about the importance of the line manager, because quite often we assume it's only the line manager that does the follow-up. But what you're saying is there are lots of other levers that can be pulled to help the embedding. Yeah.
Indeed. And, that might also give you some clues about where to start with leadership development interventions. How do you ensure that the line management cadre in your organization, who are the critical line managers that you need on board, and how do you develop their capabilities to be ready for what's going to happen? Who are they? So are they a key cohort in their own right? In fact, is the top team a key cohort for the process as well?
It's a bit chicken and egg, isn't it, really? Where do you actually start? But your advice, I guess, would be if you have to pick somewhere, you start at the top.
But but it may not be doing. I mean, as we would know, it may not be doing the program for
Yeah.
them. But what is their bit of learning, and what do they need to develop in order to support this program?
Well, what's their commitment to it, actually? An ongoing commitment, isn't it, I guess?
Yeah, and having that conversation at the top team does seem to be quite important, so that you don't get kind of mixed messages going on as you roll the program out. How do you ensure that they have sorted out their differences, they have come to an agreement about the language they'll use, and that are self-aware enough to know how they have to role model what it is
It's
that.
interesting, isn't it? The thought of a new development program can actually surface lots of other tensions in an organization as well.
Indeed. And I mean, I've been in, I don't know, a provider, a customer, a client, whatever, the commissioning person in loads of situations where, I have not been confident that the top team are on the same page. And, you do see too many situations where they show up at key announcements or key moments in the organization's life and start demonstrating behaviors which, you would say are not aligned
And
to
not
what you're
supportive.
trying to.
Exactly.
So
Sorry, Clive. Yeah, no, let's start to wrap up this part of the session, Clive, with this one from me. If you had to boil it down to the essential, what's the essence of a great leadership development program?
Well, alignment, talked about. I think getting the right people at the right time. I think focusing on experiential and reflective practices, sustaining it over time, and being consistent over time, I think, and not flip-flopping from model to model, or approach to one approach to another. And I think and making sure the context is sympathetic, but is acknowledged, so that it's contextualized, but also the context has been worked on, let's say. So I think those would be the.
Sounds like the context really important. They're all important, but if I had to choose one, it's making it feel like this is right for this organization at this time and into the future.
And I think in developing leadership development programs, the attention often gets focused almost entirely on the design, the internal design of, well, we're going to have a module on this, and we're going to have a module on that, and then we're going to do this, and that bit, when actually impact is determined much more by other stuff.
Yeah, no, got you. Thank you. So, Clive, thank you for that. We'd now like to throw it open. So did you hear anything in our conversation that you agree with? What do you disagree with? And of course, it'd be great to hear from some of you what made your most successful leadership development program. So